If you remember from last time, we talked about that the religious transformation of Europe takes place under Henry VIII. Okay? Henry VIII is a king. He becomes king, and he becomes obsessed with this concept of having a male child. He is married to his first wife, Catherine, who was a Spanish princess and was done over for political reasons. But up to 1518, Catherine has had many pregnancies, but no really male child, and only one surviving child, a daughter named Mary, was born in 1516. Henry is obsessed with having this male child to succeed him. But it becomes pretty apparent that after 1518, Catherine is not going to be able to have any more children, and that if he wants a male child, he's going to have to do something drastic. They can't just kill Catherine off. You can't just kill your wife off. You were married to her for political reasons. She's a Spanish princess. If she up and dies, everybody's going to know that there was some sort of plot here, and it's going to result in a war. So that's not good. That's not right. The Catholic Church's position on divorce is what? What's the position of the Catholic Church on divorce? The Catholic Church does not believe in divorce. Okay? Divorce does not happen. Henry tries very hard to convince the Pope to allow him to get an annulment. The Pope does not buy into that. Okay? He says, look, you were correctly married, you can't have an annulment. So Henry decides that the only thing possible is to do something ultra drastic. He will take England out of the Catholic Church. Now, groups so far, smaller groups, have left the Catholic Church. Martin Luther's followers in Germany left the Catholic Church. John Calvin's followers in France and Switzerland left the Catholic Church. That's a small group of people. You're talking about an entire nation now picking up and breaking ties with the Catholic Church. So this takes an act of parliament, literally. Okay? Henry has to convince the representative body of England, Parliament, to do this. And they will go along with it. One, because Henry's the king, but also because they didn't have to pay taxes to Pope anymore. They didn't have to do certain things anymore. They could maybe even create their own church, which they do. So there's a lot of risk and reward here. Henry is not motivated by religious reasons. Henry is motivated because he wants to have a male child. And the only way that he can do that is to break ties with the Catholic Church and create his own church, which he does. That church will be called the Church of England, oddly enough. Here in America, sometimes we call it the Anglican Church. In the Church of England, the head of the Church of England is the king, or queen as it is today. And that monarch, all right, as you could probably guess, in 1533 or so, or 1532, will grant himself a divorce so that he can marry his next wife. So Henry's desire for a male child essentially brings the Reformation to England. It makes England a target for Catholic hostility, as you'll find out later on. Okay? And it is very disruptive. If you're an English citizen
Okay? Your entire life has been spent as a Roman Catholic. Your parents were Roman Catholic. Your grandparents were Roman Catholic. And then all of a sudden, because of the king, you wake up one day and you're not Roman Catholic anymore. You're a member of the Church of England. What does that mean? Okay? So this is a very disruptive thing to have happen. But Henry, like I said, does this because he doesn't feel like he has any alternative, selfishly, because he needs that male child. So he divorces his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, in 1536. Okay? Remember, their only surviving child is a daughter named Mary. Okay? So she is the only surviving child of that union. Okay? So Henry will then marry his second wife, Anne Boleyn. Now, Henry had been having an affair with Anne Boleyn for quite some time. Okay? He had been in love with Anne Boleyn for a while. But if they had a child together before Henry had a divorce, that child would not be a legitimate child and could not inherit the throne. But once Henry's able to secure his divorce, he marries Anne Boleyn, and they very quickly have a child together. That child is named Elizabeth. And I don't know how many boys you know that are named Elizabeth. So what's the problem here? He's had what? Another girl. So Henry and Anne don't seem to be able to get pregnant again. Henry, in a really kind of crappy move, Henry will accuse Anne of being unfaithful, which being unfaithful to the king is an act of treason. And being unfaithful to the king also means that that offense is punishable by death. So Henry will accuse Anne of being unfaithful, have her imprisoned in the Tower of London, and she will be executed right there, where that little spot is right there. Okay, so Anne Boleyn is executed for being unfaithful to the king, which is really a trumped-up charge and not really the truth. But his first wife he is divorced. His second wife he's had beheaded. Okay, so now the Henry VIII lottery continues on to wife number 3, Jane Seymour. Jane Seymour will produce the male child. Okay, she will produce the male child. Okay, his name is Edward. The problem is that Jane has a very difficult labor and delivery. And shortly after the baby is born, Jane Seymour will bleed to death. So his third wife dies shortly after childbirth, but has produced the living male child that Henry so desperately wanted. Now, Henry will go on to marry 3 more times, okay, none of which produce any children. Henry's child producing years are over, and the women that he marries from here on out, they do not produce any children. Now, I'll tell you who they are because it's important to know. Kind of you hear about the 6 wives of Henry VIII every now and then. Okay. So after Jane dies, he marries Anne of Cleves. Okay. And that's Anne. He divorces her shortly after they are married. The legend or the story is that he married her sight unseen, and she was not as attractive as he thought she was. So they will divorce shortly after they're married. There's Anne. His 5th wife, okay, there's Henry, middle age. His 5th wife, Catherine Howard, she really does have some extramarital affairs and runs around on the king, and she will be executed in 1542. So his fifth wife is beheaded, okay? And his sixth wife, okay, Catherine Parr, outlives him. Okay, his last wife, apparently, most people believe, was probably the most, I guess, the best one for him. So they actually had a good relationship until Henry died. So she outlived him. All right, the six wives of Henry VIII are important because of one thing. They all produce, well, the first three produced children. And the first three resulted in England completely changing its religious faith. Later on down the road, you're going to see how that impacts us here in America and the English colonies that are established as a result of that. After Henry dies, though, okay, after Henry dies, his son, the only son, becomes king. Now, even though Mary and Elizabeth are older than Edward, they don't become king because they're not what? They're not males, okay? So Edward becomes king. Edward is very young, and he's also pretty sick. Edward may have had some sort of blood disease, okay? Some people used to think it was hemophilia. Others think it may have been something else, but we don't know. But he may have had some sort of blood disease, and he was never very healthy anyway. But Edward would rule from 1547 until 1553. And you guys can see that's not very long. Okay. Only about 6 years, not even quite 6 years, before he finally succumbs to his illness. He is young, he has no children. And so, without any children, this is going to throw the English throne into chaos. When Edward dies in 1553, who is going to become the new ruler of England? The oldest child, which is who? Mary. Okay. Why is that a problem? Mary is already the oldest child. Mary is also what faith do you think she is? Catholic. She doesn't believe that any of her other brothers and sisters were legitimate, and she's Catholic. What do you think she wants to do to the rest of England? What? Restore the Catholic Church. Exactly. So Mary comes in full of anger for the way that her mother had been treated. And she is determined to bring England back to the Catholic Church. When people began to protest, when people began to, especially Protestant leaders in England, began to protest, what do you think she does? Miss Norman, what do you think she does? Look at her nickname. She starts killing them. Okay? So she will start killing them. Ruthless. Who would be able to protest? Protestants, yes. Now, all Mary needs to have happen is what? She's to marry, she's like a child, that child will be baptized Catholic, and what will happen? When she dies, she'll have another Catholic mom, okay? And so that child can then continue that process of bringing one back into the Catholic Church. She marries, she does appear to be
1558, she dies childless. And also dies without having accomplished what she hoped to do, which was bring England back into the Catholic Church. When she dies in 1558, now who becomes king? Or queen? Elizabeth, the last of Henry's children.
It is a miracle that Elizabeth becomes queen. Think about it. Her father had to die. His son Edward had to die without any children.
Then her older sister Mary had to die without any children before she could ever find her way to the throne. But she does. And when she does, she becomes, if you ask the English to rank their monarchs, she always is at the top. Elizabeth becomes one of the great English monarchs. Notice that she also rules for about 45 years. So after a lot of turnover at the top, we're finally here. Some steadiness. Okay? Also, think about Elizabeth.
What faith is she?
She is not Catholic, she is Protestant. And so she begins to turn England back towards Protestantism. Elizabeth has a lot of money. And she does not have to deal with a religious conflict because she sees a big future for England. And that future can be disturbed or even destroyed because of religious controversy. And so she doesn't want that. So she makes it very clear very early. England is Protestant. We're going to continue to be Protestant. Okay? It's even called the Elizabethan settlement because what? She wants to settle it and move on. But she has other fish to fry. It's under Elizabeth that several things start to happen. Okay? The Elizabethan period and English history is one where tons of things are happening. Okay? The age of Shakespeare. It is the time period where England becomes a world power. Rather than some podunk island, England becomes a world power and becomes a world power pretty quickly. They are also going to begin to explore because Elizabeth sees what the Spanish and the Portuguese have done. And so she wants a slice of that pie too. Very quiet. English sea captains are given to go ahead to start pirating Spanish ships coming out of the New World, stealing what they have, which of course infuriates Spanish. Why would Elizabeth want that to happen? Like sticking the knife in and turning it real slow. Right? When the Spanish get mad, what does Elizabeth say? Those aren't English ships. They're not flying an English flag. No idea who these people are. You know who they are? Yeah, she knows. So, not only are the English sort of learning how to explore, they're also learning how to stick it to the Spanish a little bit as well. When the Spanish protest and the Spanish complain, Elizabeth ignores them. Now, Elizabeth has to fight off a challenge to her reign. There actually is, she has a relative that in Scotland that the Spanish her name is Mary too. She's sometimes called Mary Queen of Scots. To separate her from Mary the First and Bloody Mary. It's a totally different person. But because they're both named Mary, people get confused. But the Spanish would really love to see Mary Queen of Scots challenge Elizabeth for the throne because they would support her over Elizabeth. Well, Elizabeth finds out that really there's a plot against her and has Mary Queen of Scots executed. All right? Which, of course, infuriates the Spanish as well. The Spanish had a plan already in place that to support Mary Queen of Scots, they were going to invade England. And in 1588, the plan was to launch a massive invasion of England
using the Spanish Navy. There's Mary Queen of Scots. And what the Spanish were going to do, well, I remember Spain is kind of right down here. Okay? The Spanish Armada in 1588 was going to come through here and attack England, start launching a naval attack on England, landing forces in southern England, and have them invade England. Well, Mary is executed, but Spain goes on with the plan anyway. The Spanish Armada in 1588 is a disaster. Okay? The Spanish launched the invasion. The weather is terrible. The English Navy it relentlessly pounds on the Spanish Navy. Remember all those years of pirating the Spanish? The English had learned a whole lot. Their ships were better. Their captains were better. They had taken great leaps forward in naval warfare. The Spanish had not. And so it is a disaster for the Spanish. Elizabeth looks like a hero. She had left London. She had left the palace. She had moved down to the south. She had put on her armor and dressed troops, told them, hey, we're going to fight. I don't let these guys do, we're going to fight. And she comes out of this not only successfully defeating the Spanish invasion in 1588, but also comes out of this as one of the most beloved monarchs in English history as a result. 1588, and the defeat of the Armada in 1588 is a massive turning point for two world powers. In Spain, the Spanish began a decline that they are never going to recover from. The Spanish really had reached their peak, and now they were on a pretty steady decline. In the meantime, taking a wild guess, who was on the upswing, who was beginning to flex their muscle, who was beginning to grow as a world power? England. And so, over the next few years, English explorers, many of them former pirates and others, began to go out and start to explore. The Spanish can't stop them. And so, this is really the beginning of English exploration. And it's also really the beginning of English attempts at colonization here in the New World. Under Elizabeth, the first real attempt to plant a colony here in North America is done and failed. Okay, it's lost colony of remnants. The English left some settlers at Island off the coast of North Carolina, and the sail or the ships promised to come back and resupply them. So they left these settlers on the island of Rhodes, sailed back to England, got detained, couldn't get back to them when they came back to the colony and disappeared. Still a really technically history about
the survivors and those simply blended in the American population. When they couldn't survive on the island anymore, they went on the mainland and blended into the Native American population, which is what a lot of people thought happened anyway. But here's the deal, okay? This is a huge step forward for England. This is what we've been trying to get to. We've already talked about Spanish colonization, okay? We got the Spanish. But we are English colonists. America's beginning begins with really us being English colonists. And so we have to get the English involved in settling us first before we can really push forward on what goes on. Elizabeth dies in 1603. Elizabeth dies in 1603. She has no children. She is sometimes referred to as the Virgin Queen because she never marries and has no children. Virginia is named in her honor because she is the Virgin Queen. But in 1603, she dies without any children. She is the last of the Tudor monarchs. So when she dies, this causes the English to have to try to find a new family of rulers, which they do. Elizabeth's closest relative is actually the already existing King of Scotland. There's a very young king of Scotland. The King of Scotland was named James VI. But he is Elizabeth's closest living relative. And after Elizabeth dies, he will be invited to become King of England, and he becomes James I, King of England and Scotland. It's the beginning of the Stuart monarchy. So when Elizabeth dies, okay, when Elizabeth dies, we start with the early Stuarts, okay, the beginnings of the Stuart monarchy. All right. Now, I want you to take time out. Okay? I want you to listen to me. We're going to actually skip ahead in the chronology here. Okay? Because I want to introduce you to these guys. Okay? Because these are the kings that rule from the beginning of American settlement. What's the first permanent English settlement in America called? Oh my God, I'm going to the first permanent English settlement. What? Jamestown. Named in honor of James I. Okay? So English settlement begins with the Stuarts. Okay? And then notice, by the time the Stuarts end over there with Queen Anne in 1714. Okay? You're on the beginning, you're really on the eve of within 50 years of the beginning of the American Revolution. Okay? So most of the American colonial period is spent under the reign of the Stuarts. Okay? So it's important that you know this. But in essence, this is English history. Okay? So you got to learn to put this timeline down, and then as we go through the colonies, you have to kind of refer back to it to make sure you know who's who. Okay? There's a reason why Jamestown is called Jamestown and Charlestown is called Charlestown. Okay, that makes sense? Okay, so you've got to kind of fill in the gaps, right? So make sure that you sort of copy down this little outline I've got up there, because it'll help you to fill in the gaps of the American colonial period. Now, if we were in Western Civ or World Civ, we'd talk more about these, but I'm just going to introduce you to them, okay? Just so you kind of know who they are.
We're not going to spend a whole lot of time on any of them, but I am going to spend some time on a couple of these things that you see up here, okay, real quick. All right, the first of the Stuart monarchs was that guy, James I. I just told you about him, okay? James is the king when the first permanent English settlement at Jamestown is established, okay? James, though, is not a big fan of Parliament, okay? James would rather be ruling by himself. That's a big deal. In Europe at this time, there is a growing movement towards more powerful kings. In Western Civ and World Civ, we call it the age of the absolute monarchs. If I tell you that you're an absolute monarch, what does that mean? You have total, complete power, okay? James doesn't have that because of Parliament. English Parliament, this representative body in England, dates all the way back to the 1300s. And so look what James says when he becomes king, okay? Surprised that my ancestors would ever have permitted such an institution to come into existence. I'm a stranger, found it here when I arrived. I'm obliged to put up with it. I cannot get rid of it. But he sure would like to. Because if he could get rid of Parliament, what would he become? Absolute, okay? Now keep that in mind, because his son, Charles, is going to do the same thing. He is going to try to get rid of it, okay? So, James alienates Parliament, okay? It is also the time period where you begin to see people who are upset with James's religious policies start to come to America. The Puritans, for example, and I'll tell you who they are later on, okay? But you start to see them leave and come to America, okay? So, James, like many absolute monarchs, believed in the divine right of kings, that his word was the same as the word of God. God had put him into power to rule over us. And so my word should be similar to that. James dies in 1625, okay, and is replaced by his son, Charles I. Okay, and there's Charles. Charles's biggest goal is to get rid of Parliament. Now, in a long story short, he does. He sends Parliament home very early on in his reign, and he intends never to call it back. He raises money like his dad did on his own, so he doesn't have to depend on Parliament for money. And he decides, really, he is going to try to rule without Parliament. And he might have been successful, except he got England involved in a war, a religious war of all things, against Scotland. And so Charles has to call Parliament back into session. When he does, all hell breaks loose. Because people in Parliament who had been sent home, they're like, look, you got to promise that you're going to call us back every 3 years, for example. Okay? You're not going to send us home and leave us home. You got to sign this and say you're going to call us back into session every 3 years. Will Charles do that? Even though he needs money to fight a war, will he do that? Why? He's taking your head. Why? If he does that, what does he give up? He gives up the chance of becoming absolute. Right? So he will never agree to that. And what it does is it draws a wedge between the king and the Parliament to the point where you have a civil war break out. From 1642 until 1649, there is a a civil war that breaks out. Okay, I'm gonna skip ahead in all this to when that happens. Okay, the supporters of the king were called Cavaliers. The supporters of Parliament were called Roundheads. And you have a civil war that breaks out. Who wins? Let me give you an idea here. So there's the Cavaliers and the Roundheads. Okay. Let me give you an idea here. Okay. Charles I is defeated at Marston Moor, handed over to Parliament in 1645. In 1649, Charles is put on trial for treason, convicted. Why do you think Charles's reign ends in 1649? Because he is beheaded. Why kill the king? Why kill the king? Because the king had dared to try to get rid of Parliament. And Parliament says, no, this is what happens to you if you try to get rid of us. So in 1649, Charles is murdered, executed, however you want to think about it. It's regicide. And England no longer has a king. From 1649 until 1660 over there is a period of time in Latin, it's called the interregnum, okay, between the kings, okay. From 1649 until 1660 over there is no king of England. So who rules England? Parliament does. So instead of now having an absolute monarch, you have Parliament in charge. How well does it go? It's a disaster. Okay? They really flub it up. All right, we'll stop here. Okay, when we come back next time, all right, or when you guys watch the video for Friday, then we'll pick up right here and I'll finish this up. Friday's video is going to be super important. Okay, because I'm going to begin the process of colonizing the Americans in that video. Okay, so Friday's video, super important. Okay, make sure that you watch it and that you complete the assignment for it before Sunday. Okay, so when we come back on Monday, we're really going to be colonizing. We're actually going to be kind of moving through the American colonies. Okay. So it's important, very important that you pay attention to Friday's lecture, okay? All right, we'll stop there. You guys have a great rest of the week.